Bueno, tengan sus audífonos, por favor, porque
Please
vamos.
put your headphones on because we are going to speak in Spanish and French.
Y bueno, vamos a retomar la última parte.
We are going to start with the last part of our meetings.
Tenemos esta sesión plenaria.
We've got these plenary sessions with one of the panels where we will have the relators, the rapporteurs about women, external contexts, and about the main commitments that have been reported in our meetings. We'll have a good summary of all the topics that we have been working on. We will begin with Rex Varona, who is going to talk about the main commitments. Rex, you have the floor.
Mic test. Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. We still have energy? Yeah, anyway, because this is just midway through the whole process, the next 3 to 4 days, we still have. And okay, so I'm Rex. I'm supposed to report on the commitments that you discussed for today. Unfortunately, I only got 2 out of 7 reports. So what I will try to do, which is the impossible, is try to get data from the first day, from the common space yesterday, and try to link it to what we need to do. As Waze was saying this morning, what we actually want in this session is to ask ourselves, no? As civil society, what can we do together, either in engaging with the GFMD and the governments, in relation to the global compact process. That's one. The other one is, what do we do together from now until eternity? No, from now until whenever the global compact is adopted. Okay, so that's essentially what I'll focus on. But before that, I'd like to ask, how many here were in the 206 or 207 GFMD or high-level dialogue? Who among the people were there? Okay, thank you. So we see a handful of hands, about 10 or so. That reflects not only because we are too old, no, after 10 years, but because the GFMD started as a very restrictive process in 2007, in 2006. In fact, I would like to go full circle with what Waze was saying in the first opening day, that Berlin is symbolic because of the wall, how it was imposed on people to divide, to repress, to oppress. No? And then the good lesson is that the people, through the resilient action, were able to break that down. Of course, not complete, but still we're able to open a lot of opportunities. In a way, GFMD and the CSD days in GFMD is symbolic of the wall. Because at the start of it in 2006, we were actually directly warned by GFMD. I'm sorry if Peter is here, Sutherland, but he might be angry at me. But we're explicitly said, never bring the issue of human rights, or else all the governments will walk out of the room. Never discuss deportation, regularization, and all of these issues. Focus on remittances and how they help with development. That is the positive message that we wanted. Of course, we did not listen. No? We dared to defy that kind of restriction, and that's why I'm wearing this T-shirt, because this is one expression of that. When CSD was still dictated by the governments who will join what is the agenda, what we did was to create this process, the People's Global Action on Human Rights, on Migration, Development, and Human Rights, which will actually happen after this on July 3. So if you're still in Berlin, please join us somewhere here. No? But I'm saying that because what we said was, if we concede on these points, then we will never go to the situation where we will actually realize a justice-based and rights-based GFMD. I'm starting with that because then many of the discussions we had on the first day and also the commitments that were discussed were based on that perspective. And I was happy that the Swiss delegate or the SDC delegate this morning said, it seems that nothing is off limits anymore in the GFMD and in the common space in terms of discussion. That is true, and in a way, that is our victory. No? And therefore, the handful of people that started the process is now this whole room, which we think should be the backbone of the movement that should carry us forward. So in having said that, what were the commitments that were discussed during the initial days? I think a very good and brilliant synthesis was done by Waze already this morning, which I have a copy of, and also of Jabril. I'm sorry I could not pronounce the names properly, but then, so I will not repeat that what they have said. But the 10 points that are in the opening synthesis today are essentially a summary of what happened in the first 2 days. So in relation to that, what were the commitments? I'll discuss commitments along 3 lines based on the information that I got. So one on what we want to do in relation to labor migration, recruitment, etc., all that whole sector. The other one is on commitments that we want to do in relation to undocumented migration, irregular interface with refugees, etc. And then the third is on children and vulnerable populations. But my colleagues here will report on that, so I'll just refer and then pass on the mic to them. And then the fourth is on reintegration and the return processes. Okay? But before I report on that, there is a host of a lot of things that were raised that is hanging in the air. And therefore, I'd like to propose that to be areas of action for us. In effect, the question is what process or what strategy can we agree on together from now until perhaps 2018 to define the following? I think you raised this, and Jibril kind of referred to it this morning, that we could not actually say we will not discuss anymore the principles, no, and only focus on implement. Because if we do that, the danger will be what CSD was at the first year in 2006. We can implement something that will actually perpetuate all the injustices and then the exclusion that we want to avoid. So for example, our first question is, if there is one of the big qualitative gains we had since 2006 is the New York Declaration, 2016. This did not exist 10 years ago. That's why GFMD is an open-ended process. It has no reference point. The agenda is based on how the organizers define it to be. In contrast, since 2016, we already have the New York Declaration. So my first question is, do we have a process to say that the New York Declaration becomes our baseline in terms of how we define migration and development and the mass movement, mixed movements of peoples? We never kind of explicitly decided on that. But to me, that's an open-ended question, because if the Global Compact therefore comes along, and it is also a declaration, when do we say we want the New York Declaration instead of the Global Compact? Which of the two would be the better one? Or can we say that we use the New York Declaration because it is already adopted to be the baseline, that anything worse than that in terms of content, process, procedures, then we will not accept? No? Because the default is if we don't accept anything worse than that, then we go back to the New York Declaration. So my question is, what process can we conceive of together to kind of resolve that question? By the way, how many of you have read the New York Declaration of 2016? Yay, at least a majority in the room. So if you haven't yet, please read it, because many of the questions actually raised on the floor were more or less already contained in the New York Declaration. So that's the first baseline. The second baseline is, and I lift from the report of the labor group, defining SOR, safe, orderly, and regular migration. As we constantly said in the labor discussion, look at the domestic workers. If they are processed in a safe way physically, can go from Philippines or Indonesia to Hong Kong, they have contracts, many of them, so it's regular. They get contracts and employment. So they are in a safe, orderly, and regular labor contract. But are they actually justly treated? Why is pregnancy among them treated as a crime? Why are they domestic workers forever? No residency, no family rights, could not move to another employer, could not move to another job. So therefore, the labor work actually was recommending that safe means physical safety plus that there are standard contracts and all the labor conventions. Second, orderly means not only a clear procedure on how to go from one country to the other, but then it is based on open governance that is accountable, the government recruitment ethical, no fees, etc. And then regular means that it adheres to the labor standards and the UN normative conventions. Now my question is that our shared definition of SOR? Is that definition also shared by the governments? So what is our process of resolving that as a baseline? Because if the governments settle to the definition of safe being only physical safety, orderly only meaning having clear step 1, 2, 3 of how to go from Hong Kong to Philippines to Hong Kong, and regular in the sense that you have a contract, then we will perpetuate the forever slavery-like conditions of domestic workers, at least in Asia, but all over the world. So we run the risk of actually institutionalizing the injustice that we want to fight. So that's why my question is, as CSD, when are we, and what is our procedure, because you did not give me your recommendations on this, to define that. And as Jibril was saying this morning, how to merge that definition into the government template, so that if it is only among us, that will be outside of what they agree on. So what we want to fight for is that it becomes part of what they also agree to. And there are a host of other kind of red lines that were flagged by many groups, like no deportation of children, reunification of families, etc. Incidentally, I think the report from the youth group would say, for example, Switzerland, correct me if I'm wrong, does deport children or people below a certain age, which we can consider as children. So if we say, therefore, that like it's orderly, etc. Okay. Then that's the danger of it. So having said that, these two flags or red flags is very important that we work on together. And then so I just go quickly on the recommendations of the other groups. So one is on the status of workers and the labor migration. I think the big recommendation is launch at least 4 advocacy campaigns. One is on zero recruitment fees. Another is on regularizing undocumented workers all over the world. Third is on the responsibility of recruiters and employers in adhering to the labor standards. Fourth is on government mechanisms to give channels of regular employment to migrant workers. So these were the major recommendations. They propose it as campaigns. And then on children, I'll leave it to the children. On undocumented migration, what essentially they were saying is not only the refugee convention should come into play, but also the issue of how climate disaster and many other risks will displace people. So the major recommendation is a process of defining the other types of displaced people so that they don't become forced into the refugee convention. The children report is here, and then, I leave it at that, and perhaps we can discuss in the open forum. Thank you.
Gracias. Les recuerdo que tenemos...
Thank you. I remind you that we'll need to leave at 6 o'clock from this room, so please let's make use of the time we've been allocated. Milena, please, could you tell us what happened in your group?
So Good afternoon. My name is Milena. I'm the child rapporteur for the 10th GFMD. I'm half Armenian and half... Can I use this? I'm half Armenian and half Persian. And I would like to say that the GFMD Civil Society Days are coming to an end, that it's time to report back in my function as a child rapporteur. And thank you for the rich, targeted and practical discussions with lots of Tatendrang. I would like to summarize how participants of the GFMD were making references to children in vulnerable situations and identifying concrete mechanisms to ensure safe, orderly and regular migration. So what I mean by orderly migration is to create safe spaces for children on the move to make them feel at home and welcomed. But what I mean by regular migration is to find a regular situation of protection for children after a period of insecurity. So I'd like to tell you now 12 points if you want to write them down. My first point is safe and regular pathways for children on the move and other children affected by migration, as well as their families, with full protection throughout their journey. Children must not be separated from their families until this is in their best interest. I can imagine you can agree. No child should be detained for immigration purposes. Provide alternatives to detention which evidently are better solutions for children. Effective case management can be used as cost-effective and efficient alternative to detention like the UNHCR pilot program in Mexico and other countries. Further alternatives to detention include foster care and group homes, residing at the particular address determined by the authorities, reporting periodically to the police station, depositing a sum of money or an ID with the authorities, etc. My third point is ensure that the best interest of the child is the primary consideration. Thank you. In all matters concerning migrant children, the best interest determination procedures must be individualized on the one hand, to address the unique situation and demands of the child, and formalized on the other hand. My fourth point, global compacts should provide appropriate accountability mechanism similar or in reference to the reporting to the Committee on the Rights of the Child. Adopt and implement measures to foster an open and non-discriminatory society to prevent like xenophobia, racism, and discrimination against children. Then my sixth point, inclusion and integration. Adopt and implement measures that actively support inclusion, but both ways. Integration and inclusion is not a one-way street, but requires programs and commitments of both the host communities and the migrants themselves. Inclusion is largely facilitated by access to formal and regular education and healthcare systems in the host country. Having the chance to learn the language is critical to successful inclusion of migrant communities. Also, let's please not forget that the situation of child does not fundamentally change overnight when the child turns 18. We need to make sure that youth from 16 to 24 have access to services and protection if necessary. Now I would like to talk about the legal citizenship. It's my seventh point. Grant minor citizenship after 5 years of residency in the host country. About terminology, change our perception by using the right language and terms when we refer to migrants and especially children on the move. For instance, by replacing the term illegal migration with undocumented migration and legal pathways with regular pathways. The role of media is critical in influencing the public perception of migrants. About deportation and return. First of all, no unaccompanied minor should be deported to a country where the child would face war, conflict, abuse, persecution, or exploitation. Only if return is in the best interest of a child or fully voluntary, assess the reintegration options, ensure family and social reintegration, and ensure the safety of all persons concerned. Provide psychosocial and medical support as necessary. Provide individual follow-up in the form of accompaniment and reintegration support. It is extremely important that the social workers are skilled and trained on the work to cope with the challenges they face. About exploitation and trafficking, along the migration journey as well as in the destination countries, no child should be forced or incentivized to enter into exploitative labor. We must reduce the risk of re-trafficking and increase the chances of successful reinsertion. The immediate identification and referral of exploited migrants to the child protection system is critical. Children and youth are more than victims of war and conflict, abuse, exploitation, poverty, or trafficking. We have a voice and, more importantly, dreams, wishes, and ambitions for ourselves. As the only child in this room, let me urge you adults to never speak about us, without us. As children and youth, we will continue to join political spaces like the GFMD because we are part of civil society as well. We will continue to claim our right to participation as children on the move, and we will continue to advocate for the rights of migrants and refugees together with all of you. We must hold states and governments accountable to these measures and recommendations in the global compacts, but especially in the implementation of all principles and agreements that will be included in the compacts. Therefore, let me share the commitments and action items I take back home from this GFMD that are especially related to children. We have a really good working document from the Initiative for Child Rights in the Global Compact that summarizes the situation and rights of children on the move. Now, let's make sure that everyone is aware of these rights and mechanisms. So we must take this document and approach our national governments and convince them to commit to the goals, targets, and indicators in this working document. So for this purpose, let us find and collaborate with friendly states and other relevant stakeholders who are allies in advocating for the rights of the children on the move and other children and youths affected by migration. This way, we can influence the development of the GCM in favor of these rights. Collect, disseminate broadly to all relevant actors and create awareness about good practices from the ground for child rights related matters. For example, alternatives to detention. To develop evidence-based solid arguments for the inclusion of these rights in the Global Compact on Migration. We will make sure that children and youth are included in the further process of development and monitoring of the Global Compact on safe, orderly and regular migration, as well as the Compact on refugees, for example, me. Yesterday, during Common Space, I explained how migrant children's voices must be heard and taken seriously. Of course, always in accordance with their age and maturity. Believe it or not, we can also influence major policy documents like the Global Compacts and help ensure that our goals, targets, and indicators are met by the governments. Last but not least, we appreciate that the Destination Unknown campaign to protect children on the move and the campaign to end child immigration detention have committed to forming a joint youth advisory board. This board will enable children and youth to not only shape the direction and strategy of these big global campaigns, but also play a vital role in raising awareness and advocating for the rights of children on the move. And finally, to quote François Crapeau, I hope I spell it right, the important word in United Nations is nations. This is the reality. So then let's be united for the rights of children on the move, but let's go beyond the talk and take action. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Milena.
Por favor.
Ahora Carolina, por favor, con el reporte.
Now, Carolina, please, with the report on women.
Thank you very. Dear civil society colleagues, dear sisters, queridas hermanas y queridos hermanos. It has been an absolute honor for me to be the rapporteur for women at the Civil Society Days. I would like to thank you all for raising all the issues with regards to women. This is an issue that I personally feel quite strongly about as a migrant woman from Colombia who has spent the last 20 years in the UK and has now recently migrated to Australia, and as having been working in human rights for the last 20 years in different contexts. I would like to start my report with two inspirational quotes, one in Spanish and one in English. The one in Spanish, very strong, from the Comité de Mujeres Desaparecidas del Salvador, las mujeres somos luchadoras y no vamos a callar. The second one, from Luis Arbor, again, quite strong. The Global Compact should aim to promote the best interests of women as women themselves define what is their best interest, and it should promote empowerment and leadership of women. Luis Arbor also talked specifically about elevating the focus of women and girls because it has been too far neglected and securing a gender-responsive compact. I'm going to talk about the issues that were brought up throughout these days, and I start with women's agency and autonomy because I think over the last 3 days we have heard quite a lot on this, and it's in terms of how we frame the debate because women, migrant women, we are not vulnerable per se, we're not a vulnerable population, it is actually the immigration policies that puts us in a vulnerable situation. There were also mentions of women's agency as an amazing force and the importance of highlighting the work of migrant and refugee women-led organizations. We also spoke about the danger of talking together about women and children because it can actually obscure what is very particular to the situation of children and to the situation of women. And also it fails to address that many women many women are not mothers. On multiple discrimination, the intersectionalities of oppression such as sexism, racism, classism, discrimination based on sexual orientation and other discriminations need to be recognized and addressed with proper measures to promote and enable women that are affected by those multiple oppressions to claim their rights. On trafficking, it was mentioned that it is essential to ensure that anti-trafficking and anti-smuggling measures, concerns and rhetoric that are increasing punitive measures and criminalization do not negatively affect the human rights and dignity of victims of trafficking, of migrants, refugee and asylum-seeking women, and other migrants. On racism and xenophobia, it was mentioned that it is key to address racism and xenophobia with specific policies that can be monitored. And there is a need for states to enact anti-discriminatory laws and measures that target forms of discrimination faced by migrant women and by LGBTI migrants. Again, it was one of the non-negotiables was that any sort of legislation that could discriminate or marginalize certain groups depending on their gender. On availability of data, it was raised that we need disaggregated data about gender, age, race, and different types of disaggregation. On regularization, it was highlighted that the compact should encourage programs of regularizations and permanent residence with very specific measures to address undocumented migrant women and girls. And it should create safe and legal migration routes, including family migration and family reunification, both specific initiative for women and families. It was mentioned that it is frequently that women and children who apply for family reunification and resettlement, they are the ones that apply, but there are major difficulties for them to actually obtain the identification papers to proceed with the application. So this issue needs to be addressed. On independent status, there are many problematic issues for women that are on dependent resident permits and that place them in a situation of isolation and at risk of abuse. Women must have independent status without depending on spouses or on sponsors. In some countries, women can apply for a permanent visa, but this happens only after situations of violence, and this could only be done mostly for physical violence because psychological violence is very hard to prove. So states should create more regular channels for women's migration that is not dependent on a single employer or on the spouse. On firewalls, again, it was talked about the importance of establishing firewalls between public services, access to justice, and migration enforcement, particularly for undocumented women survivors of sexual and gender-based violence and other forms of violence who often prefer not to report crime because of fear of deportation. On existing negative practices, the group called for banning any sort of discriminatory practices in migration that prevent access to migration for women on factors such as race, gender, age, pregnancy, marital status, etc. It also called for banning on existing policies in some countries of the Middle East that are deporting and detaining women when they get pregnant. On transit and access to services, there are often very dangerous journeys that for women at risk of sexual and gender-based violence and other types of violence, including gang and state violence. There were examples of women coming to Europe through different routes and being abused or becoming pregnant en route, not being able to access services. So there was a call for a need for sexual and reproductive health care for all women regardless of their status. It was also mentioned that sexual and gender-based violence should be recognized as a specific category or reason for being able to apply for asylum. On circular migration, the concept was framed as problematic, and it was mentioned that it infringes on the rights, particularly on women's rights, because it ties women to one employer, it puts them in situation of exploitation and abuse, forcing them to be apart from their families for a long time, and also forcing them to work on short-term contracts without a path to permanent residence. This makes it difficult to unionize or to claim any sort of rights. Women are also disproportionately affected by climate change and are affected by push factors that force them to migrate, which was also brought up. So there should be rights-based development and to address structural causes and promote human rights. On detention, it was mentioned that in the US, detained women with children may be given alternatives to detention with ankle monitors or GPS shackles, which they must wear while going through the deportation process. But this further increases discrimination and trauma, and also the women need to pay for this to be removed to private companies. So there should be humane conditions to all incarcerated and a call to end administrative detention for all migrants. On return, it should be called deportation when it's forced and not voluntary return. Return must be a choice, and this should not be a global compact on deportation, which was one of the quotes that came up. And finally, as a general important point, it was stressed that the compact should endorse and implement the UN Women recommendations on addressing the human rights of women in the Global Compact on Migration. Gregory Magniatis told us yesterday not to assume that others have more power than we do on the global compacts, and how we as a civil society have a responsibility to take initiatives on this. Luis Arbor also told us that the compact will see very specific input and language about women in migration. In this sense, the compact needs to guarantee non-tokenistic and meaningful participation of civil society, migrant-led groups, women migrant-led groups, and women migrants themselves, and it should allow for diversity of opinions within the civil society. It was also stressed that we shouldn't aim for only what's possible, because we risk undermining existing standards, and we need to aim for strong human rights and gender-responsive languages and a high standard for the compact that we really want as a civil society. And I would like to finish by mentioning 3 keywords, and these are leadership, women's power, and full participation in processes that actually affect our lives. And I encourage you, sisters and brothers as well, to advocate for a gender-responsive and human rights-based compact that will work for us all. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Caro, muchas gracias. Y nuestra última intervención del panel sobre el informe consolidado de los encuentros externos, Vincent ayúdame con tu apellido, por favor.
You could help me pronouncing your surname.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So this is the restitution of the outreach conferences which have been organized in 3 cities, Budapest, Dakar, and Kathmandu. They were watching the morning sessions of the first day of the CSDs, the Civil Society Days. So it's in the name of nearly 50 participants from these 3 cities, Dakar, Budapest, and Kathmandu, that I would like to thank the organizers of the Civil Society Days, and also Tas des Hommes for putting in place the outreach conference. So it's a bit the Eurovision part of the conference. Now it will be the global vision. So we'll speak in French for our friends in Dakar. Donc là maintenant je vais parler en français.
So switching to French, since some of our friends contributed to the discussion in Dakar, I'm just slowing down so that everybody can connect to the right channel. We had about 10 young children and teenagers in Dakar. They met. The live stream worked quite well, despite the fact that the internet connection was sometimes a bit dodgy, we were told. The young persons there represented various organizations, including the General Secretary of several organizations that have attended this big event that was held here in Berlin 2 weeks ago. So some of the young people who met in Dakar were here before. There was also Moussa Abouya from the RAGT organization, and MIGT, sorry, which is part of a campaign on unknown destinations, which is quite big in terms of helping people in West Africa. The 3 young people first that have contributed have quoted Mrs. So by saying, yes, if you're black in Europe, you've seen someone who doesn't belong, while you might actually be born there and belong maybe more than some white people. We also hear from the young people in Dakar that you're often of course, controlled by the police and ask for your papers every time you move around any city in Europe. They ask us 3 questions, very open questions, on what are the priorities of government towards children and families, why do we want to stop children from migrating, and why do governments not take measures or decisions to support children in obtaining respect for their rights, like all other children. And I'm going to try and read out some other questions or quotes. We don't feel that there is a collective approach by states. They do not want to support children. States act collectively when they are trying to reject people or act in a repressive manner, but often that means thousands of children are stuck between their country of origin and their country of destination that is rejecting them. So that's very quickly a short contribution from the colleagues in Dakar. Back to English now.
And let's go quickly to Kathmandu, Nepal, for the second outreach conference. There were 18 youth from the program of the youth NGO called We for Change, watching the live streaming on the conference. The youngest was 16, the oldest was 24. The gender was balanced, 9 of them were female, the other 9 were male. All participants shared the background of migration. Unfortunately, the internet connection didn't work well, and they could see only the first session. I'm precise as well that We for Change also is working with the Destination Unknown campaign. So the first reflection from Kathmandu is, I quote, during the opening sessions, it was a delight to see that GFMD was able to capture voice of women in most of the sessions. And then 2 areas in which We for Change will work in the future. The first one, integration with the schools and colleges to aware young people regarding safer mobility. And the second one, since Nepal has not yet formulated any policies on migration, we, as a CSO, can advocate in formulating one. So thank you very much, We for Change, and a big hello as well to our collaborators working hard in South Asia. Then to conclude, let's go back to Europe, in Budapest. The distance between Berlin and Budapest is very short. It's 1-hour flight, we know that. But in terms of migration policy, we're talking about light years. Do we have to talk about shrinking space in Hungary and in several countries in Central Europe and all new member states of the EU? We can talk about the new shameful Hungarian law demonizing the civil society, especially those organizations working on migration, forcing them to register in their own country as a foreign agency. So 2 days ago, we had a very interesting panel of professionals, CSOs, international organizations. We had the IOM in Hungary, we had the Hungarian Helsinki Committee, we had MEDEDEC, the Hungarian Association for Migrants. We had also the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, the regional office for Europe. We had SOS Children in Hungary, we had the Office of Commissioner for Fundamental Rights, and the European Roma Rights Center. Very important panel, which have been, and also I salute my colleagues from Telesum in the regional office in Southeastern Europe. So they start by reflections, and they quote and I quote the Budapest Group. It was important that one of the speakers raised the fact that migration challenges are not only present in Europe, and that in fact the majority of migration challenges are felt in other parts of the globe. About the Global Compact, the compact is of paramount importance for Hungary, especially considering the xenophobic environment the government has generated in recent years. However, a huge discrepancy exists between the global movement and the situation of Hungary. Clearly, there is a lack of commitment from the Hungarian government to implement any strategy that would advance migration and protect the human rights of migrants. And to finish off what the group will work in the future, all of them, that the national context in Hungary is rather difficult and challenging, with the phenomenon of migration being equated to terrorism and as a threat to national security. It is vital for civil society actors to bring forward and increase the visibility of the positive examples and benefits of migration, successes of human mobility. To counter the negative perceptions being promoted currently, cooperation should be enhanced between these actors. And they conclude with one of the quotes that they heard from here. We over-principle and we underdo. By the way, I'm very happy to announce that Telezom took the decision to join the efforts of the Hungarian NGOs, and we will protest officially towards the Constitutional Court in Hungary against this discriminative law. Thank you again very much to the nearly 50 children, youth and adults who actively participated to the outreach conferences in the 3 major cities. It was the first for this GFMD. It shows that it could be a new way of participating in the future. Thank you for your attention.
Muchas gracias, Vincent.
Thank you, Vincent. No, we don't have that much time. I wonder how much time do we have for questions from the floor? The same amount of time? We have 15 minutes maximum for questions and comments from the floor. So to achieve more participation, I ask you to be very precise. I understand that Cécile Relin is among the members of the public. If you could please tell us what's been discussed in the mayoral forum.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. Hello everyone. I'm here indeed to report on an important event that has happened just before the Global Forum on Migration and Development and just before the Civil Society Days. And actually, some of you in this room took part in this 4th edition of the Global Mayoral Forum on Human Mobility, Migration and Development. So what is this mayoral forum about? First of all, it was hosted this time by the mayor of Berlin. So it's very much a forum for mayors, by mayors, and it is really focused on, having among themselves a conversation about what are their policy options to deal with a very important issue they're grappling with on a daily basis, that is human mobility. Human mobility, because indeed they're looking at it from the point of view of internal migration, so movement arriving in their cities, but as well from the point of view of international migration. And of course we were having, and that's very important, mayors that are sitting in cities that are both receiving migrants or sending migrants or both. So really, they are really the one that on a daily basis deal with that complexity. And more importantly, they are the one that come with innovative and constructive policy options to deal with this complexity. They are the one that are really trying to uphold social coherence and build on all the benefits that diversity brings to our societies. So as I said, this was the 4th forum of that kind. It's being organized by the mayors, as I explained, but with the support as well of some key partner organizations that are IOM, UNITA, the World Bank, as well as the UN Joint Migration and Development Initiative, and we're very happy to have the support of the Swiss Development Corporation throughout this process. And I'm sure that all of you that have participated in the government days and also in the common space, you've heard so many times that now there is recognition of the critical role of cities and local and regional authorities. And I think this is a major step forward. And why is it so relevant for you assembled in this room? We know very well, and this is what the city leaders have told us, is that they cannot do this work without the very strong engagement of civil society organization, without a very strong partnership with civil society organization. And I think this message is coming across in a very, very strong manner, and I believe this is really a major step forward. Because indeed, and this was really very clear in the discussions among the government, there were 2 issues that were recognized of particular importance. One was policy coherence, so making sure that what is being done at the local level translates also in policy options at the national level. So it's not only about the national level imposing, the framework on the local level, because we know that sometimes this goes not so well. So, there comes the whole issues of, building firewalls and how this is happening in local context. So the aspect of policy coherence came out as some that was of critical importance. And again, I think it's highly relevant to all the conversation we're having here today. The other aspect was the angle of integration, so the role of cities to integrate migrants in our societies. So I think, moving forward, I believe it would be extremely important to include local and regional actors much more in our conversation, not so much in the context of the GFMD, that is the discussion among governments, but also in the context of this conversation of civil society. And that's why we're really happy, in fact, and you've heard some of the members of local and regional authorities that are present in this room taking the floor. And I think, it's a reflection for all of us of how we bring these different constituencies together, not only in the government days, but also within the civil society days. And, as GMDI, we're very happy to be a proud member of the International Steering Committee of the Civil Society Days. And this is definitely something that we wish to work forward with in the future, pulling these bridges together. And sorry if I was too long.
Gracias, Cecile.
Thank you, Cecile. We have 30 minutes, so we'll need to finish at 6. So please, I'll ask you to be kind enough not to make questions. We're going to start with the next panel, and we'll leave the questions for the end. Thank you very much.